Thank you, and thank you all for coming to demonstrate your democratic rights today. My name is Dr. Roger Hodkinson. My presentation to you today is about the most grave injustice our society has ever experienced. I'm here because this is a defining moment in my medical career, and indeed my entire life. It's a fight for a generation. But first let me tell you why I feel qualified to address you. I say this not in any sense of being a narcissist. Just for your information, I've never frayed my degrees because I think they're a bit snotty. But I'm being denigrated by Snopes and AP, and I feel obligated to tell you about
Snopes are liars!
You're over the target, that's why!
I'm a medical specialist in pathology, graduate of Cambridge University in Britain.
That's when you receive
I've had many leadership roles in medicine, both provincially and nationally, including those as a university teacher, a board examiner, and a laboratory accreditation inspector for the very college that's got its teeth in me right now. I was previously the president of the Alberta Society of Laboratory Physicians. That means pathologists, by the way, representing all the pathologists in the province.
Wow.
I've been an assistant professor at the Faculty of Medicine at the U of A. But more importantly, I've also been very active in public health policy for many years as the honorary chairman of ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, which is the leading non-profit organization taking on the predatory marketing practices of big tobacco. And I'm intensely proud of that. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And I'm not a great resetter. But I do know that I've spent my entire career in evidence-based medicine. And what I'm going to tell you today is what I would consider the truth. I'm not presenting myself as an expert in any of the fields that are relevant. They're all microscopic areas with their own experts, and I'm not. But what is desperately needed is for the general public to hear common sense from a qualified person. And I'd like to think that's me. So that's why I'm here today. I believe that the most important duty of anyone involved in public health is to protect the public from health risks that they cannot effectively manage themselves. In my opinion, during the COVID pandemic, there's been a gross intrusion of government into health matters that could have been perfectly well managed by individual adults. As was the case in recent pandemics. The degree of this government overreach has resulted in the most profound fear and unwarranted loss of personal freedoms ever witnessed in Alberta in its entire history. In essence, public health is the practice of medicine at the society level, and it should follow standard medical ethics where every act is performed for good reason. That is no different from the obligation of an individual physician to his or her patient. Society is in fact the patient of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. In medicine, the primary ethic is the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. But that concept appears to have been totally ignored, as the harmful consequences are by any measure grotesquely disproportionate to any of the purported benefits. The cure is far worse than the disease. The mandated interventions should have been supported at the very least by a consensus in evidence-based medicine that they would be successful. And of course, the evidence simply does not exist. All the measures currently being undertaken, including masks, social distancing, and closures of all kinds, have no consensus for effectiveness in the medical literature. And in fact, the weight of evidence is against those measures. Masks are, you might say, the very face of this issue. Very visible evidence of compliance. The various mandates can only be perceived as totally arbitrary, knee-jerk reactions for politicians to convince the general public that they are doing something. But politics playing medicine is a very dangerous game.
Yeah.
And as being played out in this province, it shows no signs of abating. Politicians must get their heads around the fact that in 2021, medicine is impotent at controlling the spread of COVID-19 in the general population. The genie is out of the bottle. We must accept common sense accommodation as the only viable approach. So let me say it emphatically. Nothing works to control the spread of this virus. In my opinion, and many more expert than me, the approach to this pandemic in Alberta was wrong-headed from the very inception. The Great Barrington Declaration eloquently argues that there should have been no change in public policy compared to previous epidemics. Life should not have changed one iota, except for enhanced protection of the vulnerable. The Great Barrington Declaration called that approach focused protection, and the only public health intervention that was needed. I firmly support that conclusion. Dr. Bhattacharya, an internationally esteemed epidemiologist from Stanford, has said that lockdowns are, quote, the biggest mistake ever made in public health, close quotes. Trying to protect the working well with a very low risk of death by shutting down the economy is ridiculously naive. But let's step back for a moment and consider the actual risk of death from COVID in Alberta for asymptomatic people who are feeling perfectly well. Using the government's own statistics, for the working well, those under 65, the risk of death over the whole year was 1 in 15,000. I ask you, does that warrant shutting down an economy that's already tanking? Remember too, that the strength of a public healthcare system is only as good as the strength of the underlying economy to support it. In my view, the fear and hysteria over COVID is being maintained for two principal reasons. The first driver is brutal international silencing of all counter opinions, whether from politicians, journalists, or physicians. And the second driver is asymptomatic testing, which is not only useless because of countless false positives that they refuse to reveal, but counterproductive because it drives ongoing public hysteria.
Stop the testing!
Public hysteria, in turn, is being used by politicians to double down on mandates known to be ineffective. You know, If one mask isn't working, we recommend 2, or maybe next week 10. Who knows? I'm going to attribute the ongoing panic over COVID to the following litany of failures. And I ask you to bear with me because although he may be interesting, Max is much more, and you really must stay around to hear him. First off,
oh, they're not recording it.
Turn the camera on!
First off, there's been a failure of due diligence from the very get-go based on the absurd computer modelling produced by Dr. David Ferguson of Imperial College London, UK. And by the way, this fellow was, or is, a theoretical physicist. He is not a physician or epidemiologist. He's just a mathematician. This was the most singular failure because it became the predicate for similarly exaggerated responses. Failure to inform the public that there was no consensus in the medical literature for any of the draconian restrictions so arbitrarily introduced. Failure to report to the general public the cumulative adverse consequences of the interventions on general health care, dying relatives, funerals, weddings, church services, school closures, graduations, and thousands of small business bankruptcies.
Boo!
I drove past the Grace Life Church this morning. It's near where I live, and I can assure you there are still 2 chain-link fences still around that church. I'm only halfway through the failures, guys. Failure to halt the testing of asymptomatic people. It should stop immediately. Failure to produce detailed statistical reporting to inform the working well in lay terms about the actual degree of risk from COVID and that variants are nothing to fear. Failure to classify deaths appropriately. The vulnerable population with many comorbidities who happen to be COVID positive at the time of death are being classified as deaths directly due to COVID. That is statistical sleight of hand. Dying with COVID is not the same as dying of COVID. Failure to promote the life-saving potential of vitamin D, which is totally safe. Cheap and has overwhelming evidence of protection from COVID-19. What used to be called the season of coughs and colds is now being recognized as the season of vitamin D deficiency. In a month or so, the soon will come up again, higher in the sky, and we will all start making vitamin D in our own skins. And guess what? The panic will disappear. The pandemic will disappear. I'm sorry, not the panic. I'll keep that going forever. The pandemic will disappear, and then they'll say, see, we wrestled it to the ground. To which I respond, no such thing. It's the classic fallacy trap. Just because B follows A does not mean that A caused B. Get a grip. Failure to communicate to the general public the inadequacies of PCR testing. There are no published statistics in Alberta, or anywhere for that matter, on the percentage of false positive results by PCR-based methods. False positives, not only that, have a huge multiplier effect on contact tracing, resulting in many times that number of people being taken out of the workforce too. The internationally renowned epidemiologists who authored the Great Barrington Declaration have stated categorically that contact tracing is useless and counterproductive. Failure, just two more. Failure to inform the general public that the vaccines are all strictly experimental. They're totally lacking the customary 2 to 4 years adverse event trials, and therefore, in my view, by any definition, unsafe. That is a failure of the second important medical ethic, that of informed consent. There was no need for a rushed vaccine given the scale of risk. And in my opinion, its use is profoundly reckless. Indeed, there are concerns about its safety for women under 50. Events already surfacing which proves the point that they are unsafe in spades. The vaccine potential, of course, has the potential of getting infinitely worse with so-called vaccine passports. Yes, they say, you can refuse the vaccine if you want. But you know what? You just won't be allowed to travel. How outrageous is that? But finally, the failure to balance the loss of freedoms against the scale of the threat. The art of government is in large part about balance. In my opinion, with COVID-19, the Alberta government got the balance badly wrong. It prioritized the containment of COVID over all else. The government's entire focus has been on one virus, ignoring all other measures of health and well-being. Furthermore, the profound loss of personal freedom resulting from the various mandates are an unforgivable assault on the essence of our humanity. And totally unwarranted given the scale of threat. This is not Ebola. This is not SARS. In fact, Sweden and Florida clearly demonstrate that draconian actions have little impact on the final toll from COVID. However, even to debate these questions is now stigmatized by government, the media, and professional colleges as irresponsible and to be resolutely suppressed. The entire population has been intimidated into compliance with the threat of outrageous fines and actual jail for disobedience. The Alberta government's encouragement of citizens to snitch on each other is utterly reprehensible.
Commies!
In summary, these numerous failures of the government of Alberta in the COVID pandemic have directly caused the most monstrous loss of freedoms, unwarranted fear, and horrendous personal consequences ever recorded in our province, and all without any justifiable cause. It's been said many times, show us the evidence. It doesn't exist. This must all end now. Now. It will never be allowed to happen ever again. The general public must never again have their rights so trampled on, while we are perfectly capable of managing this type of problem ourselves. Independent of any government intervention, as we have done so effectively in years gone by. So I repeat one last time for effect, nothing works to stop the spread of this virus through society. Nothing could work, nothing did work, and nothing will work. The virus must be allowed to run its course. Government must simply accommodate to medicine's impotence and allow the public to use its abundant common sense. Thank you very much. Open up, Alberta.